In 2023, there was an unfortunate hack on Insomniac, a PlayStation Studios. We got to see some documents that were not designated for the public. Now, these documents really did open up our eyes to what may be going on internally that PlayStation was considering on the announcement and even the planned acquisition of Activision by Xbox. Now, in their document, they talked about industry shifts and things that could happen. They talked about how, because of this acquisition, Microsoft could gain greater dominance over them, that Microsoft could basically couple that with exclusivity and pretty much pummel them in a double sense. They also talked about the Game Pass threat, which was a day and date threat that they're going to launch any game that they bring out to the foray or to the public, that was going to pretty much be a Game Pass launch for any of their, for all of their consumers across the board. These were things that were all taken into account at the time, and we're not just hearing about them, we're starting to see them actually manifest. So if you think about a day like, say, depending on where you are, yesterday, Xbox already launched a day and date stealth drop, in a sense, for an entire remaster of a 15-year-old classic title. This is just insane when you look at everything. Now, this article that I showed you at the start of this video really does tell a story, because I remember there were, conversations for a while there that said the only way this document actually did make any sense was if Microsoft engaged in exclusivity with Activision games. Now, what's funny is this article here says Sony tells regulator COD players are likely to switch to Xbox even without exclusivity. You see, when this document was probably crafted, I think they were looking at the possibility of exclusivity, but they already knew that even without it, somewhere, they could analyze and see that even without it, Xbox still had an upper hand. And that upper hand is basically what PlayStation was trying to prevent them from gaining at the end of the day. It was a lot of ground to concede, and PlayStation themselves knew that if they conceded this amount of ground, that they were toast. Their business strategy of having leveraged Call of Duty as a major player annually, coupled with going ahead to block other games from going to Xbox, coupled with, on the back end, their own exclusive games, which are high dollar, budget games, would probably be able to go ahead and take out Xbox. But now Xbox had pretty much taken a major piece of that puzzle if they could acquire Activision Blizzard King. Reading this article, you'll see that Sony has told UK competition regulators that it believes some Call of Duty players are likely to switch to Xbox even if the series remains on PlayStation following Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard. You can pursue the article and read the rest of it on Video Game Chronicles, because that's not necessarily the meat and potatoes of my video today, because when all this was going on and PlayStation was focused on Activision Blizzard King, there was a sleeping giant, an underdog per se, that was Bethesda. Now, Bethesda's acquisition did not necessarily seem like it really did hit. To be very honest, even I myself was like, okay, this is a solid and strategic acquisition, but as somebody who wasn't really well versed with Bethesda games, I just could not see the play. However, now I'm starting to realize that this was actually a much better play than even the thought that Phil Spencer had in his mind to try to acquire Warner Brothers, because that actually came out in the emails in the Activision Blizzard King thing. So, having never played the Elder Scrolls games before, I decided to do a little bit of homework. I was like, okay, let me go figure out what these Elder Scrolls games are. 1994. Do you know what happened in 1994, ladies and gentlemen? Nigeria qualified for its first World Cup, and we beat Bulgaria 3-0. I can't forget that. I was a little boy back then, but that was quite pivotal to know and to see that happen, in a historical sense, and to be able to understand it. You know what I mean? So that's probably one of the first few historical things that I realized as a young boy. Not knowing at the time, though, that the Elder Scrolls as a game series was birthed. We looked at the different parts and all of the associated content with it and realized that this is actually a gargantuan in the RPG video game realm that Xbox had access to for what I think is a measly fee. When PlayStation acquired Bungie for $3.6 billion as a response to the acquisition of Activision Blizzard King, I think they probably should have acquired maybe a studio with such a legacy. There are not many of them around, and Bethesda gets flack. They get like 50% of the flack Ubisoft gets, but they also get to sell as many, if not more, copies of the games that Ubisoft sells. Because Ubisoft, yeah, they have IP, but they get like all the flack in the gaming industry. Like Nintendo could fart and people would blame Ubisoft. Like, you know what I mean? It'd just be like, well, Ubisoft, what's wrong with you, man? That's the kind of thing that happens. So when I started looking up Elder Scrolls, I was like, man, like there is a lot of, stuff here in terms of what Bethesda does. And ladies and gentlemen, as somebody who has been discussing the gaming industry and mostly, having conversations across the board, and a lot of the detractors of the stuff that we point out here as going in the industry is, in a sense, subject to some scrutiny from some PlayStation users or some people generally. It's very interesting that many of those folk who play on console are not so aware or keen of the power that Bethesda has over its very classic community. And that is the RPG genre and having a good number of games within the RPG genre. We haven't even gone to the shooter yet. Just hold on. We'll get there soon. We're just talking about Elder Scrolls right now, right? So looking at this Elder Scrolls and looking at all of that, I then fired up Steam. I said, what in the world is going on here? How is it possible that, these games kind of flew under the radar all these years for someone like me? Well, again, as in the case of RPGs, it's not been necessarily something that's, I would call one of my favorite genres, right? I like the action adventure, that, the fighting games. These are the kinds of games that I find myself, more drawn to. And sometimes I'll play an RPG or so, mostly RPG lights. But in looking very closely, I started to see that, man, these games carry with them a lot of legacy. And if somebody could harness or tap into them, they have a resonating effect. Sure, a Call of Duty has a ginormous effect when it comes to the bank statement each year. But what about the fillers? What about the times, the months, the quarters, and those years where, yes, a Call of Duty game is still far down the road and not many people are probably looking at, or anticipating the next Call of Duty. There are many people who don't play those games. What kinds of games would you probably bring their way? What would be the games that would fill that niche, at least to capture an audience that's there? Because while all this was going on and PlayStation was fighting all of this, I think they may have realized that something interesting was coming, or maybe did not realize that this was in the play, because Activision is, for the most part, sort of, in a limited position for now until they harness more of their IPs. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that they don't have IPs, but like I'm saying, because again, these are IPs that are foreign to me in a sense, since I didn't play these games, I'm looking at it like, where's the, potential? There is potential. We saw that Sony basically lost, their their shirt trying to make this deal not happen. But in looking through the Elder Scrolls series, I'm asking myself, I wonder if there is not a future plan to continue to do stuff like this within this series, to continue to resonate over the years and create longevity for this particular franchise, especially in this industry that we are in right now. And that's just the legacy of the Elder Scrolls from an RPG perspective. There's also the legacy of the Fallout games. There's the somewhat tarnished legacy of the Wolfenstein games, which are not RPGs. But the reason I pointed out these games and the RPGs is because these are the kinds of games that actually do well on PC platforms. And in some cases, they do well on Xbox platforms. They'll do well on PlayStation platforms, don't get me wrong, because if you think about games like Baldur's Gate 3, the developer shouted out Xbox community for hooking them up with some, purchases. Right? That was actually an indication and a tip of the hat to say, man, you guys are really about that life in terms of RPGs, right? So looking at games like Cyberpunk and how these games were basically, in a sense, adopted, I think Bethesda is, in my opinion, a very strong contender to fill a specific segment for Xbox's business plan that was not necessarily considered by a lot of the folk who were analyzing Xbox, including the industry analysts or those who position themselves to be industry analysts. And this is one thing about gamer amnesia that happens from time to time. You know, we gamers, we suffer from amnesia when it comes down to it. And I think with that amnesia came a lot of people pretty much judging and juxtaposing what Xbox and, you know, Microsoft was doing with their gaming division and not seeing this. Maybe somebody wrote some stuff and said, you know what? Maybe they can harness these Bethesda IPs and not just harness them in certain terms of what are they going to make that's new, but harnessing them in terms of cultivating what was already there that made people enjoy and like Bethesda. Think about the reception of a game like Starfield, which did well, but had its own qualms with different aspects of the community compared to the Oblivion game. Now, again, Starfield was not on PlayStation, so perhaps we could have seen a different kind of reception had the game made its way to PlayStation. That's all I'm going to say. But I think this game is more than likely going to go to PlayStation, or maybe Xbox is going to just hold it off and say nope, because PlayStation reached their muddy little dirty hands to try to money hat this game. We're going to just lock it away. As maybe for anybody who wants to buy an Xbox console or dial into the Xbox platform as a bonus for you to get in here. So we look at the Activision thing and we look at the way PlayStation reacted and responded to it. You would have thought that that was probably the only play that Xbox had under their sleeves. But even with all of this going on and with, you know, at this time, you know, Jim Ryan's comments where he was saying that, you know, there could be items which Xbox could use to, you know, be a differentiation of some kind. Like if you read this statement, SIE told CMA that even if COD games remained available on PlayStation following the merged entity will still be able to engage in partial foreclosure by increasing the differentiation between the versions of COD available on Xbox and on PlayStation, the document reads. Well, what are they worried about? They already analyzed that there was going to be a day-and-date threat, that they were going to put Activision games on Game Pass. That was already the differentiation. If anybody did not realize that there's already a differentiation between every game that comes out as an Xbox game and those games that go everywhere else, well, you weren't paying attention, or maybe you downplayed it so much. Now, the reality is here that there are more people that are probably going to basically understand this. And while people who were pretty much going ahead to deflect and try to detract, they missed out on what the reality was. And so far, what we're seeing is this differentiation is actually more consumer-friendly, more accessible, and less expensive than the PlayStation differentiation when they actually leveraged a third-party game, the biggest moneymaker in the year every year, to do so on their platform. So I think PlayStation actually now has multiple proxies to try to respond to in this particular regard. You see, no longer can the press run interference for them anymore. The reality is here. What is the press going to say? An Oblivion game didn't launch, didn't get stealth dropped? They can't. Which makes it even much more impactful and makes it even much more memorable at the end of the day. So, I'll leave you to your thoughts, or to going back to playing the game that you were playing and enjoying. If you have any comments, please let me know in the comment section. Thanks for watching the video. Appreciate you guys' time and audience. Hopefully we'll talk pretty soon in another one. Peace out.